Our next keynote speaker, a lady that we all know extremely well, Associate Professor Cindy Blackstock, will join us. And Cindy's presentation is just because we are small doesn't mean that we don't stand tall. Cindy has been our invited international speaker over the last two SNAICC conferences in 2007 and in 2010, and we are delighted that she can join us again this year. Cindy Blackstock is the Executive Director of the first National Children's Family Care Society in Canada and Associate Professor at the University of Alberta. She has worked in the field of children and family services for over 20 years and has authored over 50 publications. Her key interests include exploring and addressing the cause of disadvantage for Aboriginal children and families by promoting equity of culturally based initiatives. Please join me in welcoming Cindy to the stage.
What a great honor to be here on these traditional lands in the home of your ancestors' dreams. As countries like Australia and Canada, we expect our people and we expect our government to do better for children when it knows better for children. And yet too often, our governments fail to step up to the plate. This is a letter from a child to the Government of Canada to our Prime Minister. It says, "Dear Prime Minister Harper, hello, my name is Imran. I think that just because your skin color is different or you have a different religion does not mean that you should be treated differently. Like right now, we have proper houses, we have water, and we have good schools. In Attawapiskat, it's a First Nations community, they do not have that. And yet they are human beings too. I think something needs to be done. And P.S., we are trying to fix the mistakes we made from the past, and you are not helping." And P.P.S., right back with an explanation. Sincerely, Imran. You know, a lot of people say it's so difficult, so simple that even a child, or so complicated even a child can't get it, but the children do get it, and our government still don't. You go out to your communities and your families and your parents know that they have a right to clean water and they're not getting it, while our governments are spending all kinds of money on frivolous things that really don't make a matter in the lives of children, and we have to stand together and make that stop with our kids. So in Canada, we have the inequalities that you know only too well here in your own country. And it's not because the Canadian government is broke. It's because it simply has gotten into a pattern of using racial discrimination against children as a legitimate fiscal restraint measure. And that is something that all of us as people of the world need to stand against. You see, equality, our children are so sacred, so valuable, that equality should never be an aspiration for them. It should be a right that is a floor upon which they reach towards their ancestors' dreams. And it doesn't matter how much the government is trying, they are not doing enough if they are still perpetrating racial inequality in our countries. Because our kids deserve better, and they only have one childhood, and they shouldn't have to wait. It's also good, we know from the world's research, not just for First Nations people, but for all people. We look at the research and it says if you want to be a government with a robust economy, with good long health spans for people, low incarceration rates, you need only do one thing, and that's to reduce the inequality in your own country. So governments know this, and yet they're doing the wrong thing. And the Canadian government is a G8 economy. And yet in the UNICEF rankings recently, our kids were doing 17th in the world. It is a problem when your economy is doing better than your kids. The economy is leaving the people behind because the rich are getting richer and the gap between the rich and poor is staying in place. We share the same trauma that you do. You had the stolen generations. We had residential schools that ended in 1996. And yet, child welfare has pretty much taken over from those residential schools. We have more children in child welfare care today that are Indigenous in Canada than at the height of residential schools. Driven there by poverty, poor housing, and substance misuse, the same factors that drive so much disadvantage for Aboriginal families here. The good news is we know how to fix that, don't we? If we used engagement with community and developed culturally based approaches to those problems, we could help a lot of families get back on their feet and be proud of who they are. And I'm just going to give a plug to something from the United States here. The U.S. government, federal government, actually allows for child welfare funding to be used for families for rent, or for doing renovations, or for getting rid of black mold contamination. The state of Connecticut has spent $70 million doing that, and they've saved money doing it, because it's a lot cheaper keeping kids safely in their families with a renovation than it is paying for that child to be in child welfare care. So there's all kinds of good things that we could be doing and you're doing already in your communities. But we need that equal opportunity of funding in order to make it work. We cannot build a society of equality and opportunity on the backs of having to do it at a lot cheaper rate than the government itself would allow. The government knows about this inequality. This is its own statement from the Auditor General of Canada saying the government admits to the inequality. But it's often, yes, we know that it's very sad what's happening to Aboriginal children in Canada, and we're doing everything we can. It's not everything we can, it's everything they choose to do, and it falls far short of what these children deserve. So in 2007, we joined with the Assembly of First Nations, and sadly, after 10 years of jointly working with our government, documenting the inequalities, documenting the harms, we filed a human rights complaint against the Canadian government, alleging that they're racially discriminating against this generation of First Nations children. And it is a binding law in our country where the government can be found to make a legally transgression of discrimination, a legally finding of discrimination. But more importantly, they can be ordered to fix it. It's sad, isn't it, that in a country like ours, a country like Canada, where there's so many good and great people, where values of fairness and equality are so pervasive, where we're so wealthy, that we have to take our government to court in order to get them to treat the most vulnerable in our societies fairly. It shocks not only just Indigenous people in our country, it shocks to the fairness of other Canadians as well. And when we filed this case in 2007, there was only 20 people in the room. And we created this campaign called I Am a Witness, where we load all of Canada's court documents up and load all of ours. And then we simply ask Canadians to watch. It is now the most watched human rights case in Canadian history. Thousands and thousands of people watch this case on a daily basis, online, through the media, they come in person. And what's most important about it is they're hearing the Canadian government trying to get off this case on a legal technicality. But fortunately, after the Canadian government spent $3 million and 6 years trying to get off it on legal technicalities, they lost every single case, and on February 25th of this year, our government appeared before the tribunal to account for its treatment of this generation of First Nations children. Now, yeah, it was a great moment. And in the courtroom, there was a lot of spectators. In fact, there are so many people coming to the tribunal, we have to move it to the largest courtroom in Ottawa. And the spectators tend not to be your usual court watchers. They're children. You see, children really may not be experts in politics, and they may not be experts in the law, but they are experts in love and fairness, aren't they? It's because they're so close to the Creator that you don't have to show them that this is wrong. It just simply isn't right. And so they come to the courtroom. And because they're kids, they bring this wonderful energy to the courtroom. For example, one group of kids brought an autograph book, and they wanted autographs of all the lawyers, including from the Government of Canada. And they could chase them down because they're wearing all those robes that lawyers wear, right? They wanted to know, they said to one of the lawyers, I heard one of the little boys say to him, is Stephen Harper, that's our Prime Minister, is Stephen Harper here? And the lawyer said, no, he's not here. He said, well, isn't he the guy that tells you what to do? I heard that lawyers have to do what their boss says that they need to say. So why isn't he here? And you might wonder what children would possibly get out of hearing their government argue on legal technicalities. We all know how baffling legal language can be, and quite frankly, how boring it sometimes can be. But these children sat all morning listening to the Government of Canada's language. And then during the lunch break, I went out. And there was, you okay? That's okay, you're more important. There was a little boy there, and there was a long list of tallies. You know the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whole long list. And then on the other side, a short list. And he calls me over. And the first thing he wanted to say is, because he's sitting in the foyer between the men's room and the ladies' washroom. And I was on my way to the ladies' washroom, and he says, Cindy, there's marble in there. It's very fancy. And he was right. But he also says, do you know what this list is? And I said, no. He said, well, the long list is when the judge asked the Canada people a question. And the short list is when they answered. You know, children are the great hope of us all, is raising a generation of First Nations and non-Aboriginal children who truly value the idea of difference, who don't try and overcome cultural difference, but to celebrate it, who understand that equality doesn't exist unless there's equality for all, and that freedom is something that needs to be struggled for, not just a word that's written or sung in our national anthems. Now, you can imagine if you're Canada's Council, you might be pretty excited about the noon hour break, getting away from all the kids. But this is what waits for you outside. And so the kids are on Parliament Hill, and they have some letters to the Prime Minister, and I'm just going to read one of them to you here. Now, they actually get a microphone, and they stand up there, and they said, this is Randy. He said, I am Randy. I feel disappointed in the government. I think it's a bad idea that what the government is doing. I dream this would stop. I hope that Canada would be a better place. And I demand that First Nations children be treated equally. I am Randy. And then Bethany stands up and she says, Dear Prime Minister Harper, I think you should go back to grade 5. Because that's where you learn about something called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that says you're supposed to treat everybody fairly. And if you read that thing, you would know what kids in my kindergarten school already know. And that is that it's not fair to tell some kids they're not worth the money. It's not fair to tell some kids they're not worth the money. You know, we all have sacred children. I've been so honored to be in your company, in your countries, in your traditional lands before, and I have been so blessed to meet your elders and your children. They have the same wisdom that our kids do back home. They know it's not fair for Aboriginal children in Australia not to be able to get a clean glass of water. It's not fair that they don't all have the right and support to speak their own languages of their ancestors. It's not right that they have to fight for the lands that they have lived on for thousands of years and have never been recognized for. And it's not right that they have to go somewhere else to grow up because the government won't provide them with the in-home supports that they all deserve. We have to stand together. The time for equality and freedom for our kids is right now. Our ancestors are calling to us. I wish I could have brought all the children with me from Canada. It would have been a far more exciting flight. But as it is, I promised them that I would share a little bit of their book with you in closing, and a song written by a First Nations artist called I Am a Witness in light of that campaign. So from the children of Canada to the hearts and supports of all of you, please join me in saying that children do have power.
I am a sentinel. I can see everything. You wanna hide a symmetry, it's unbalanced and unrefined. Yet you claim in that
Prime Minister Harper, we're trying to correct the mistakes of the past, and you're not helping. PPS, right back with an explanation. Let all of us stand together now in honor and the strength of our ancestors, and let there never be another day or another time or another generation that has to strive for a basic right to be proudly who they are. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great conference. Oh, and Sharon, I wanted to give you one of the kids' books for SNAICC. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cindy.
Okay.
Please join me in thanking Cindy. What a wonderfully inspiring speech. Thank you.